Homeless girl whispered, "Please don't tell anyone I'm hungry." The veteran single dad did the unthinkable. She was shivering in the snow, begging for a secret. But when a broken war hero heard her whisper, he risked everything, his freedom, his daughter, his life, to do the one thing no one else had the courage to do. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The December wind whistled through the quiet streets of Millbrook, carrying snowflakes that danced beneath the glow of Christmas lights. Tommy Reeves pulled his worn jacket tighter as he stepped out of Maggie's diner, the warmth of the kitchen quickly fading from his calloused hands. Behind him, the cheerful sounds of families celebrating Christmas Eve filtered through the glass windows, a bittersweet reminder of happier times. Inside the diner, silverware clinked against plates as children laughed and parents shared holiday memories. Tommy's throat tightened as he thought of Sarah, his late wife, and how she used to insist on bringing Ellie here every Christmas Eve for hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. "Tommy, wait!" Maggie's voice called out just as he reached the bottom step. The plump diner owner hurried to the door, her gray hair escaping from beneath her hairnet. In her hands, she held a white cardboard box. "Take this pie home to Ellie. It's just going to go to waste otherwise." Tommy's pride warred with practicality. The military had taught him to be self-reliant, and 3 years of single parenthood had only reinforced that lesson. "I appreciate it, Maggie, but nothing," she interrupted, pressing the box into his hands. "It's Christmas Eve, Tommy Reeves. Sometimes a piece of pie is just a piece of pie." He managed a small smile, knowing Maggie meant well. "Thank you. Ellie loves your apple pie." "You're a good father, Tommy," Maggie said softly. Sarah would be proud. The mention of his wife's name sent a familiar ache through his chest. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and carefully tucked the pie box under his arm. In his pocket, the pay envelope felt thin, another reminder of how tight things were this Christmas. The street was nearly deserted as Tommy made his way toward home. Christmas lights twinkled from shop windows, and garland wrapped around lampposts swayed in the wind. A scraggly orange cat darted across his path, disappearing into the shadows of Pete's hardware store. His combat boots crunched in the fresh snow as he passed the alley behind Wilson's pharmacy. The sound nearly masked it. A quiet hiccup, followed by a muffled sob. Tommy stopped, his body tensing with the instinct that had kept him alive in war zones. There it was again. Tommy set the pie box down carefully on a nearby ledge and moved closer to the dumpster. "Hello," he called softly. "Is someone there?" The sobbing stopped immediately, replaced by the sound of someone trying desperately to control their breathing. Tommy's heart rate picked up as he edged around the dumpster. His eyes adjusted to the shadows, and what he saw made his chest constrict. A little girl huddled against the brick wall, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dark hair was matted and dirty, her thin jacket far too inadequate for the winter weather. Most shocking were her feet, bare and red from the cold, with angry scratches across the tops. Tommy's training kicked in automatically. He assessed her condition, shivering severely, possible early stages of hypothermia, signs of malnutrition evident in her hollow cheeks. But it was her eyes that struck him hardest, wide, frightened, and holding the kind of wariness no child should know. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Hey there," he said gently, using the same voice he used when Ellie had nightmares. "I'm Tommy. Are you hurt?" The girl pressed herself further against the wall, clutching a ratty backpack to her chest like a shield. Her lips trembled, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Please don't tell anyone I'm hungry." The words hit Tommy like a physical blow. He'd heard similar pleas before, in war-torn villages, from children who had lost everything. He'd sworn then never to turn away from a child in need. That oath felt just as binding now, on a snowy Christmas Eve in small-town Appalachia. Moving carefully, Tommy retrieved the pie box from where he'd set it. The girl tracked his movement with wary eyes, her body tense as if ready to bolt. He opened the box and broke off a piece of the still-warm apple pie. "Here," he said softly, holding it out. "It's good, I promise. Best pie in town." The girl's eyes darted between his face and the offered food. Her hands shook as she reached out, hesitating just before taking it. Tommy held perfectly still, letting her make the choice. Finally, her cold fingers brushed against his as she accepted the pie. She brought it to her nose first, sniffing cautiously, then took a tiny bite. A single tear rolled down her dirt-streaked cheek as she chewed, and Tommy had to fight back his own emotion. The simple act of sharing food with a hungry child on Christmas Eve stood in stark contrast to the cheerful families he'd watched through the diner windows. There in the alley, with snow beginning to drift down around them, Tommy Reeves felt something shift in his heart. The same protective instinct that had driven him to become a medic in the Army, that had helped him raise Ellie alone after Sarah's death, now focused entirely on this shivering child before him. Her hands trembled as she finished the pie, each careful bite a testament to how long she'd gone without proper food. Tommy remained crouched at her level, patient and still, as snowflakes caught in her tangled hair and his own fingers grew numb from the cold. Tommy crouched beside the shivering girl, holding out his weathered hand. "I'm Tommy," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle like he used to do with scared kids during his medic days. "Would you like to get somewhere warm?" The girl hesitated, clutching her torn backpack closer. Her bare feet were red from the cold, and Tommy noticed how she favored her right leg. After what felt like forever, she gave a tiny nod. "I'm Lila," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the ground. Her voice was so quiet Tommy had to lean in to hear it. "Okay, Lila. My truck's right over there." He pointed to his old blue pickup parked under a streetlight. "Think you can make it?" She tried to stand but stumbled. Tommy steadied her carefully, noticing how she flinched at his touch before accepting his help. Together, they made their way to the truck, her steps uneven and slow. The drive home was silent except for the truck's rumbling engine and the occasional sniffle from Lila. Tommy kept the heat on full blast, watching in the rearview mirror as she gradually stopped shivering. She sat perfectly still, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Their house appeared ahead, a modest one-story with peeling paint and Christmas lights strung crookedly along the roof. Not much, but it was home. Tommy parked and helped Lila down from the truck, supporting her as they walked to the front door. The moment he opened it, warm air and the sound of Christmas music wrapped around them. "Dad!" Ellie's voice rang out from the living room. "Come see what I made." Tommy led Lila inside, where Ellie was perched on a step stool, carefully hanging paper stars on their small artificial Christmas tree. Bits of colored paper and safety scissors scattered across the coffee table showed evidence of her craft project. Ellie turned, and her eyes widened at the sight of Lila. Instead of showing surprise or fear, his daughter's face lit up with pure joy. "Hi," she exclaimed, hopping down from the stool. "I'm Ellie. Do you want to help me decorate?" Lila shrunk back slightly, but Tommy noticed a spark of interest in her eyes as she looked at the homemade decorations. "Ellie, this is Lila," Tommy explained, keeping his tone casual. "She's going to stay with us tonight while we figure some things out. But first, I think we all need some dinner." In the kitchen, Tommy heated up a pot of homemade vegetable soup, one of the few things he'd learned to cook well since Sarah passed. The savory aroma filled the small house as he ladled it into bowls. Lila's hands trembled as she took her first spoonful. Then she began eating faster, like she feared the food might disappear. Tommy pretended not to notice, instead focusing on Ellie's cheerful chatter about her paper stars and plans for Christmas morning. "Would you like some more?" Tommy offered when Lila's bowl was empty. She nodded, her eyes growing wet with gratitude. As Tommy served seconds, Ellie rummaged through a candy jar on the counter. "Here," she said, holding out a candy cane. "Mom always said candy canes make Christmas extra special." Lila stared at the red and white striped candy. Her lower lip quivered, and suddenly tears spilled down her cheeks. Before anyone could react, she threw her arms around Ellie in a fierce hug, sobbing into the other girl's shoulder. Ellie, showing wisdom beyond her years, simply hugged back. "It's okay," she whispered. "Everything's okay now." Later, after making sure both girls were warm and fed, Tommy helped them get ready for bed. He gave Lila one of Ellie's clean nightgowns and some thick socks. The girls would share Ellie's room, his daughter had insisted, already treating Lila like a sister. "Good night, Dad," Ellie called as he turned out the light. From the other side of the bed came Lila's quiet voice. "Thank you, Mr. Tommy." Tommy settled onto the living room couch, too wired to sleep despite his exhaustion. The Christmas tree's lights cast shifting shadows on the ceiling as his mind raced. Had he done the right thing? He should have called the police or child services. But something in Lila's eyes, that look of absolute terror when she'd first seen him, told him there was more to her story. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each moment of his sleepless vigil. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white silence. Tommy clasped his hands and closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered into the darkness, "I don't know if I did right by this child tonight, but please, please, help me protect her." Through the window, the beam of headlights swept across the wall as a police cruiser rolled slowly past, its tires crunching in the fresh snow. Tommy lay still, listening as the sound faded into the night, unaware of its significance in the quiet darkness of Christmas Eve. Morning light crept through the frost-covered windows, casting pale shadows across Tommy's living room. The worn Christmas tree, decorated with Ellie's paper stars and a few ancient ornaments, stood in the corner like a humble guardian. Tommy had barely slept, his military training keeping him alert through the night. A giggle from Ellie's room broke the silence. Tommy's heart warmed at the sound. It had been too long since laughter filled these walls. He pushed himself off the couch, his joints stiff from the cold night. In the small bedroom, Ellie sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by construction paper and markers. Lila perched uncertainly on the edge, watching as Ellie pulled colorful paper chains from under her pillow. "Merry Christmas," Ellie beamed, holding out a hand-drawn card to Lila. "I made this for you last night, after you fell asleep." Lila's fingers trembled as she reached for the card. "For me?" Her voice quivered, eyes wide with disbelief. "Course it is," Ellie bounced on the bed. "Look, I drew us building a snowman together." Tommy leaned against the doorframe, watching as Lila carefully opened the card. Her small face lit up at the crayon drawing inside, though she kept glancing at Tommy as if asking permission to be happy. I don't have anything to give back," Lila whispered, her shoulders hunching. "That's okay," Tommy said, stepping into the room. "Christmas isn't about having things to give, it's about being together." He cleared his throat, fighting the memory of past Christmases when Sarah was alive. "Who's hungry for pancakes?" "Me!" Ellie jumped up, grabbing Lila's hand. "Dad makes the best pancakes ever. Sometimes they're even shaped like hearts." In the kitchen, Tommy mixed batter while the girls sat at the small table. Ellie chattered away, showing Lila her collection of paper stars. Slowly, Lila began to relax, even smiling when Tommy flipped a pancake high in the air. "Watch this," he said, pouring the batter carefully. Soon, a Mickey Mouse-shaped pancake sizzled on the griddle. Lila's eyes widened in wonder. "It's perfect," she whispered when he placed it on her plate. The kitchen filled with warmth and the sweet smell of syrup. Tommy couldn't remember the last time breakfast felt this normal. This right. Ellie told jokes that made Lila giggle. And for a moment, the weight of loss and loneliness lifted from the house. As Tommy gathered plates for cleanup, Ellie reached for the old TV remote on the counter. "Can we watch Christmas cartoons?" The TV flickered to life, but instead of cartoons, a news anchor's serious face filled the screen. Breaking news in the disappearance of 8-year-old Lila Harrison. Tommy's spatula clattered to the floor. On screen, a photo showed Lila's face, the same little girl who sat frozen at his kitchen table, syrup still sticky on her fingers. That scene 3 days ago near Mountain View Trailer Park. Her mother, Angela Harrison, has been missing for over a week. Police suspect. "No!" Lila's scream pierced the air. She scrambled back from the table, knocking over her chair. "Please don't call them, please!" Tears streamed down her face as she backed into a corner. "They'll take me away again, like they took Mama." Ellie rushed to Lila's side, wrapping her arms around the trembling girl. "Dad won't let that happen, right, Dad?" Tommy switched off the TV, his mind racing. He approached slowly, kneeling before both girls. "Lila, honey, can you tell me what happened? Who's looking for you?" "The bad men," Lila choked out between sobs. "They came to our trailer at night. Mama told me to hide under the bed. She said she saw something wrong at work. Papers that weren't right." Her small body shook with each word. "Then they took her away. I ran and ran. I don't want to go to foster care again. Please don't make me." Tommy felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. His years of military service had taught him to recognize genuine fear, and Lila's terror was real. She clung to Ellie like a lifeline, her knuckles white. "Listen to me, Lila." Tommy kept his voice steady, though his heart raced. He gently took her small hands in his. I promise you, right here and now, that I won't let anyone hurt you. Do you understand?" Lila's tear-stained face lifted to meet his eyes. "Promise? I promise." The words felt heavy with responsibility, but Tommy knew he meant every syllable. This scared little girl had walked into their lives on Christmas Eve, and something deep in his soul told him it wasn't by chance. "You can share my room forever," Ellie declared, hugging Lila tighter. "We'll be like sisters." Tommy watched the girls hold each other, his daughter's innocence and Lila's fear creating a picture he'd never forget. Behind them, through the kitchen window, snow began to fall again, coating the world in silence. He knew he'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple act of kindness. But seeing Lila's tears slow as Ellie comforted her, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. Tommy's old pickup truck rattled down Main Street, its heater working overtime against the December chill. He needed space to think, to clear his head after the morning's shocking revelation about Lila. Mrs. Colby, their elderly neighbor with a heart bigger than her curiosity, had practically insisted on watching the girls when she'd spotted Tommy looking stressed on his front porch. "Those little ones will be fine with me," she'd said, her silver hair catching the winter light. "I've got hot chocolate and Christmas cookies waiting." Her kind eyes had told Tommy she suspected something was wrong but wouldn't pry, at least not yet. The local Gas and Go came into view, its faded red sign creaking in the wind. Tommy's heart sank as he spotted the fresh missing person posters taped to the front door. Lila's school photo smiled back at him, her dark hair neatly combed, wearing a purple sweater she didn't have anymore. The word "missing" screamed in bold letters above her innocent face. Tommy parked near the air pump, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan, told him to drive straight to the police station. It was the right thing to do, the legal thing. But then the memories hit him, as vivid as they'd been 8 years ago. The village outside Kandahar, the little girl with braids who trusted him, who'd shown him where the insurgents had hidden their weapons. He'd promised to protect her family. 2 days later, he'd found their house burned to the ground. Too late. Always too late. "Not this time," Tommy whispered, his breath fogging the cold window. He couldn't fail another child. Something in Lila's story about bad men coming to her trailer rang true. He'd seen that kind of fear before. It wasn't the fear of a runaway. It was the fear of someone who'd witnessed something terrible. The gas station's bell chimed as other customers came and went. Tommy watched them through the windshield, wondering if any of them could tell he was harboring a missing child. An elderly man buying cigarettes. A mother with 2 kids getting hot chocolate. Normal people living normal lives, while his world had turned upside down in less than 24 hours. When Tommy pulled into his driveway an hour later, the sound of laughter drew him to the backyard. Ellie and Lila were building a small snowman, their cheeks pink from cold and excitement. Mrs. Colby sat watching from the back porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. The girls had dressed their creation in one of Ellie's old scarves and given it stick arms that pointed toward the sky. "Look, Dad," Ellie called out. "We named him Hope." Lila smiled shyly, her earlier tears forgotten in the simple joy of play. She'd borrowed one of Ellie's winter coats, the blue one with silver stars, that was slightly too big for her. For a moment, she looked like any other child, safe and happy. Tommy's decision crystallized. He'd protect her, at least until he knew the whole story. But he needed help, smart help. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Tommy sat at his kitchen table and dialed a number he rarely used. Rick Dalton answered on the 3rd ring, his gravelly voice familiar and cautious. "Tommy, it's been a while." "Rick, I need your help." Off the record. A pause. Those words usually mean trouble. Tommy explained the situation in low tones, keeping his voice steady. Rick listened without interrupting, the way he'd done back when he was still on the force. They'd met years ago when Tommy had helped Rick's garage with some logistics work, and they'd formed an unlikely friendship. "You understand what you're risking?" Rick finally asked. "Harboring a missing child, that's serious time, Tommy. They could take Ellie away." "I know." Tommy rubbed his tired eyes. "But something's not right here. The way she talks about her mother disappearing, about these men who came to their home. She's terrified, Rick." Another long pause. "Give me 24 hours, Rick said finally. "I still have some contacts who owe me favors." I'll look into the mother's disappearance, see what comes up. But, Tommy? Yeah? Keep your doors locked. And if anyone official comes asking, you haven't seen that girl. You don't know anything. Understand? Understood. Tommy's military training kicked in. Assess threats, secure the perimeter, protect the innocent. I'll call you, Rick said, and the line went dead. Tommy set the phone down and walked to the window. A car he didn't recognize, dark sedan, tinted windows, crawled past his house. The streetlight caught the driver's silhouette, a man whose face Tommy couldn't quite make out. The car moved slowly, deliberately, like a shark circling its prey. Tommy stood perfectly still, his body casting no shadow in the dark kitchen. He watched until the car turned the corner, its red taillights disappearing into the snowy night. He said nothing, but his jaw clenched tight enough to hurt. He checked all the locks twice that night and brought Ellie's old baseball bat into his bedroom. As he lay in bed, he could hear the soft breathing of the girls in the next room, peaceful in their sleep. Tommy stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of his choice settle onto his shoulders like a heavy blanket. He knew he'd made a decision that could cost him everything. But as sleep finally began to take him, he remembered Lila's words from that morning. They'll take me away again. The fear in her voice had been real. Whatever was happening, whatever trouble she and her mother had found themselves in, Tommy was now part of it. The morning sun cast long shadows across fresh snow as Tommy guided his truck into the church parking lot. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, trying to appear casual while his mind raced with worry. Beside him, Ellie chatted excitedly about the Christmas service, while Lila sat quietly in the back seat, wearing a borrowed dress that was slightly too big. Remember what we talked about, Tommy said gently, catching Lila's eye in the rearview mirror. If anyone asks, I'm Ellie's cousin visiting for Christmas, Lila replied softly, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. I remember, Mr. Tommy. The small brick church looked welcoming with its wreaths and red ribbons. Families streamed through the double doors, carrying plates of cookies and wearing their Christmas best. Tommy helped the girls out of the truck, noticing how Lila's borrowed shoes clicked against the salted walkway. Inside, the sanctuary glowed with candlelight and evergreen boughs. The familiar scent of pine and coffee from the fellowship hall wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Several people waved, and Mrs. Peterson, who taught Sunday school, immediately swooped in to greet them. And who's this lovely young lady? She asked, smiling at Lila. My cousin, Ellie answered quickly, taking Lila's hand. She's staying with us for Christmas. Tommy watched as other church members welcomed Lila with genuine warmth. Nobody questioned why they hadn't seen her before. Instead, they offered her cookies and complimented her dress. Lila's shy smile grew a little broader with each kind word. The service itself was beautiful in its simplicity. Pastor Jen spoke about hope appearing in unexpected places, and Tommy couldn't help but glance at Lila, who sat between him and Ellie, singing carols from a shared hymnal. After the final blessing, as people gathered in the fellowship hall, Pastor Jen approached Tommy. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she gestured for him to join her in her office. It does my heart good to see you opening your home during the holidays, she said once they were alone. That little girl seems to be exactly what your family needed. Tommy shifted uncomfortably in the chair across from her desk. Pastor, Sometimes God's plans don't always align with man's laws, she interrupted gently. But they always align with love. Before Tommy could respond, movement outside the window caught his attention. A man in a black wool coat stood near the church playground, raising what looked like a professional camera. He was pointing it directly at Lila, who was playing in the snow with Ellie and some other children. Tommy was out the door before he could even excuse himself. His combat training kicked in as he approached the stranger, moving quickly but carefully across the icy parking lot. Can I help you? Tommy's voice was controlled but firm. The man lowered his camera slowly. He was middle-aged, with close-cropped gray hair and expensive leather gloves. Just doing my job, he said smoothly, reaching for something in his pocket. I'm a private investigator working for Child Services, following up on some concerns. Tommy's jaw tightened. Show me some ID. The man produced a business card instead. Before Tommy could examine it closely, the stranger was already walking backward toward a dark sedan. Merry Christmas, Mr. Reeves, he called out, then slipped into his car and drove away. Tommy stood in the snow, memorizing the license plate number as the car disappeared around the corner. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Rick's number flashing on the screen. "Tommy," Rick's voice was urgent. "I found something. It's bigger than we thought. That little girl's mother, Angela Harrison? She wasn't just some random missing person. She was about to blow the whistle on Carlton Construction. Remember that scandal about contaminated wells last summer?" Tommy's throat went dry. "Go on." Harrison was their head accountant. Had proof they were dumping industrial waste into old mine shafts. Those chemicals leaked into the groundwater, caused a spike in childhood cancer cases in 3 counties. She was set to testify before the grand jury, then vanished the night before. Left everything behind, including Lila. Tommy watched the girls playing, their laughter carrying across the quiet parking lot. "Why didn't this make the news?" "Carlton Construction owns half the media outlets in the state," Rick explained. "They buried it. But here's the thing. Angela Harrison isn't dead. There's been activity on an account she set up months before she disappeared. Small withdrawals, different locations. She's hiding, Tommy. And if certain people think Lila might know where she is..." "Jesus," Tommy whispered, already moving toward the playground. "Thanks, Rick. I'll call you back." Inside his house 20 minutes later, Tommy double-checked every lock. He drew the curtains and made sure both girls were occupied with Christmas crafts in the kitchen. Then he went to his bedroom closet, reaching for a metal box he hadn't opened in years. The service pistol felt heavy in his hands. He checked the magazine with practiced movements, muscle memory from his military days taking over. As he tucked it away in a high kitchen cabinet, his gaze fell on Lila. This small, innocent child whose only crime was being born to a mother brave enough to stand up for the truth. Tommy leaned against the counter, watching the girls cut paper snowflakes. Lila laughed at something Ellie said, and for a moment, she looked like any other 8-year-old at Christmas. But she wasn't. She was a child who needed protection, and Tommy was suddenly very glad he'd kept his old pistol cleaned and maintained, even though he'd hoped never to need it again. The winter storm raged outside Tommy's small house, rattling windows and sending icy drafts through every crack. Inside, the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the living room walls. Tommy sat in his old armchair, watching the flames while Ellie and Lila slept peacefully on the pull-out couch nearby. Their gentle breathing provided a stark contrast to the howling wind. Lila had wrapped herself tightly in the quilt Sarah had made years ago, her small face finally relaxed in sleep. Tommy's mind wouldn't stop replaying the day's events, the news report showing Lila's face, that mysterious man taking pictures outside the church, and most of all, the raw fear in Lila's eyes when she'd spotted the photographer. The fire crackled, sending up sparks as Tommy leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Rick's words echoed in his head about Angela Harrison, a mother who'd tried to do the right thing and vanished because of it. He glanced at the coffee table where he'd spread out some papers. Local news clippings, Rick had texted him about the construction company scandal, a map of the area, and a notepad. Tommy picked up the pen, his handwriting neat and precise as he began making lists. Old military habits died hard. "Under what we know," he wrote. His jaw tightened as he added another point. "People willing to hurt a child to keep secrets." On a fresh page, he outlined his plan. A floorboard creaked, and Tommy looked up to see Ellie standing there in her Christmas pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, careful not to wake Lila. "Can't sleep." Tommy set aside his notepad and opened his arms. Ellie climbed into his lap like she used to when she was smaller. At 10, she was getting too big for this. But tonight, neither of them cared. She curled against his chest, and Tommy breathed in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Is Lila going to be okay?" Ellie asked, her voice small against his shirt. "I heard you talking to Mr. Rick on the phone, about her mom." Tommy stroked her hair, choosing his words carefully. "I'm going to do everything I can to help her, sweetheart. Just like I always do, everything I can to keep you safe. And of Stray. Of the labory Stott Ains. And of end of in 19, like how Mommy kept fighting even when she was sick?" Ellie's question made Tommy's throat tight. "That's right," he managed. "Your mom was the bravest person I've ever known." Ellie yawned. "I think Lila's brave too. She's not crying anymore when she thinks we can't see." Tommy kissed the top of her head. "You're pretty brave yourself, kiddo. Now, back to bed. It's late." He tucked Ellie back under the blankets next to Lila. As he straightened up, Lila's eyes fluttered open. She looked up at him, more alert than he'd expected. "Mr. Tommy?" she whispered. He knelt beside the couch. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lila's fingers clutched the quilt. "You remind me of my daddy. He was brave, too." The words hit Tommy like a physical blow. His mind flashed back to that hospital room 3 years ago. Sarah's hand in his as she'd whispered her final words. "Stay brave for our girl, Tommy. Promise me." He had to clear his throat before he could respond. "Your daddy sounds like a good man, Lila." "He was," she said softly, "before he got sick. Mom said he fought hard, just like she's fighting now." Tommy gently tucked the quilt around her shoulders. "Try to get some sleep, okay?" Lila nodded, her eyes already growing heavy. "Good night, Mr. Tommy. Thank you for being brave for us." Tommy returned to his chair by the fire, watching as both girls drifted back to sleep. The storm continued its assault outside, wind whistling through the eaves like mournful ghosts. The fire had burned low, casting more shadows than light now. He picked up his notepad again, but the words blurred before his eyes. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, to all the nights they'd sat in this same spot planning their future. Now here he sat planning something entirely different. How to protect a little girl he barely knew. How to find a mother who'd risked everything for the truth. The wind rattled the windows harder, and Tommy found himself checking the locks again, making sure the back door was secure. When he returned to his chair, he pulled his old service pistol from its box in the side table, checking it methodically before returning it to its hiding place. The weight of it was familiar in his hands, though he'd hoped never to need it again. He stayed awake as the fire dimmed to embers, listening to the storm and the quiet breathing of 2 innocent children who trusted him to keep them safe. The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight, marking the end of Christmas Day. In the dim light, Tommy could just make out the words he'd written at the bottom of his notepad. "Find Angela Harrison. Whatever it takes." The wind continued its haunting song, and Tommy settled in for a long night's watch, unaware that this night, this decision, would change everything. The morning sun sparkled off fresh snow like thousands of tiny diamonds, turning the world into a blinding white canvas that made Tommy squint against the glare. He reversed his old pickup out of the narrow driveway, the tires crunching through the packed snow with a satisfying crunch. Through the rearview mirror, he watched Ellie and Lila waving goodbye from Mrs. Colby's front porch, their small hands moving frantically in the crisp air. Their breath came out in little puffs of steam, and both girls were bundled up in thick winter coats that made them look like colorful marshmallows. The elderly woman stood protectively behind them, one weathered hand resting gently on each girl's shoulder. Her bright flowered housecoat looked almost tropical against the pristine white snow, a splash of warmth in the cold morning. Mrs. Colby had insisted on taking the girls for the day, and Tommy could see the maternal satisfaction in her posture as she gathered them closer to her. "Don't you worry about a thing, Tommy Reeves," she had assured him earlier, bustling around her kitchen with surprising energy. "We'll bake cookies and watch Christmas movies all morning. Maybe make some hot chocolate with those little marshmallows." She'd given him a knowing look that said she understood far more than she let on, her sharp eyes twinkling with the wisdom that came from decades of watching over neighborhood children. Tommy waved back one final time before turning onto the main road. He drove carefully through the plowed streets, his truck's ancient heater struggling valiantly against the bitter cold that seeped through every crack and crevice. The engine made a slight wheezing sound that reminded him he really needed to replace the belt, but money was tight, and the truck still ran. The town looked completely different after the storm, prettier somehow, cleaner, like nature had taken a giant white sheet and covered all the rough edges and worn-down places. Fresh snow clung to the bare branches of oak trees, transforming them into delicate sculptures. Even the old buildings looked dignified under their blankets of white. It was as if the world had been given a fresh start, a clean slate to write new stories on. 20 minutes later, he pulled into the gravel parking lot of Pete's Coffee Shop, a worn-down diner on the edge of town where locals gathered for gossip and cheap breakfast specials. The building had seen better days. The paint was peeling and the neon sign flickered intermittently, but it was warm inside, and the coffee was strong. Steam rose from the building's vents, creating a welcoming fog against the cold morning air. Rick Dalton's beat-up Chevy was already parked outside. Its blue paint faded, and the back bumper held on with duct tape. Tommy found his friend in a corner booth near the back, nursing a cup of black coffee that had probably gone cold while he waited. Rick looked tired, his normally neat appearance rumpled and disheveled, like he'd been up all night poring over documents. His usually clean-shaven face showed stubble, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them. "You look rough," Tommy said, sliding into the cracked vinyl booth across from him. Rick rubbed his face with both hands, his palms making a scratching sound against the stubble. "Been digging through files since yesterday evening. Didn't get home until 3 in the morning. He gestured to the waitress, then pushed a steaming mug across the scarred wooden table. "Already ordered you coffee. Figured you'd need it." "Thanks." Tommy wrapped his cold hands around the warm ceramic mug, feeling the heat seep through his fingers. The coffee smelled rich and strong, exactly what he needed. "What did you find?" Rick glanced around the diner, making sure no one was listening. The morning crowd was thin. Just a few retired farmers and a trucker reading a newspaper. Still, he kept his voice low as he pulled out a worn manila envelope from his jacket pocket. "Construction companies been dumping toxic chemicals in old mine shafts for the past 5 years. Angela Harrison found the proof: doctored environmental reports, fake cleanup records, bribes to local officials." He spread several documents carefully across the table between the coffee mugs and sugar packets. The papers looked official, with letterheads and signatures, but Tommy could see where numbers had been changed and dates altered. "Look here at these financial records." Tommy studied the papers intently, his trained eye picking up details from his years handling military logistics. Financial records showed large payments, tens of thousands of dollars, to 3 county commissioners and a judge. The amounts were disguised as consulting fees and charitable donations, but the pattern was clear. These are real? Copies from Angela's personal files. She was smart, kept everything backed up in multiple locations. Rick tapped a photograph that showed several men in expensive suits shaking hands outside the limestone courthouse. "That's CEO Michael Barnes with Judge Wilson. Same judge who signed the emergency order to remove Lila from her home after Angela disappeared." Tommy's jaw tightened as he recognized the judge's face from newspaper photos. The man had a reputation for being tough on crime, but apparently that didn't extend to white-collar criminals who could afford his price. "They're all connected." "Gets worse." Rick pulled out a police report with the county sheriff's letterhead. "Angela's car was spotted 2 weeks ago near the old Miller farmhouse, way out past the county line. Place has been abandoned for years since old Pete Miller died." He paused, lowering his voice even further. "Tommy, if she's hiding out there with winter coming on, I need to check it out. It's risky, real risky." Rick leaned forward across the table, his voice urgent. "If anyone sees you poking around out there, if they connect you to this investigation, these people have serious power. They could take Ellie away from you just to send a message." Tommy stared into his coffee, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. The memory came flooding back without warning. Sarah's last Christmas in the hospital. The room had smelled of pine needles from the tiny tree Ellie had insisted on bringing, decorated with paper angels she'd made in art class. Sarah had been so weak by then, her face pale against the white pillows, but her eyes were still bright and full of love when she'd reached for his hand with trembling fingers. "Promise me something," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of medical equipment. "Promise you'll keep choosing kindness. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The world needs more people who do the right thing, no matter the cost." "I promised her," Tommy said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Rick didn't have to ask who he meant. He'd known Tommy and Sarah since they were all in high school together, had been at their wedding, had watched them build their life together. "Sarah would be proud of what you're doing. She'd be proud of the man you've become." Rick pulled out a detailed county map, unfolding it carefully and marking the route to the farmhouse with a red pen. The roads were mostly backcountry lanes that wound through hills and forest. "Take these back roads here. Less chance of being seen by anyone who might report back to the wrong people." Tommy memorized the directions, studying the map until he could navigate it in his sleep. Then he carefully gathered the documents, folding them and tucking them inside his jacket pocket. "Thanks, Rick. I owe you big time for this." "Just be careful out there." Rick stood, leaving money for both their coffees on the table. "And, Tommy, if you do find her, call me first, before you do anything else. We'll need a solid plan to keep everyone safe." The drive took nearly 2 hours through winding country roads that seemed to lead deeper into wilderness with every mile. Tommy followed empty lanes that wound through snow-covered hills and dense forests of pine and oak. The farther he got from town, the more isolated the landscape became, and the more his thoughts drifted to Sarah. She would have known exactly what to do about Lila, would have seen the right path through this complicated and dangerous situation. Sarah always had a gift for seeing through to the heart of things, for knowing how to help people without making them feel small or ashamed. The Miller farmhouse appeared suddenly around a sharp bend in the road. A weathered two-story building with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch, surrounded by overgrown fields that stretched to the tree line. Tommy parked his truck behind a cluster of bare maple trees and observed the property through his old military binoculars. No fresh tire tracks disturbed the pristine snow in the long driveway. No smoke rose from the brick chimney. No lights glowed in any of the windows. The place looked completely deserted, abandoned to the elements and time. But as the afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long purple shadows across the snow-covered fields, small details emerged that made his heart beat faster with hope and anticipation. A clothesline stretched between two wooden posts near the back of the house, and children's clothes hung stiff with ice and frost. A small pink sweater, tiny jeans, socks no bigger than his palm. And there, taped carefully to the inside of a downstairs window, was a child's crayon drawing. Two stick figures, holding hands under a bright yellow sundae. Even from his distant vantage point, he could make out the wobbly letters written in purple crayon, "Mommy and Lila forever." Tommy lowered the binoculars slowly, his hands trembling slightly from more than just the cold. Angela Harrison had definitely been here, maybe just days ago based on the fresh look of the laundry. The question that gnawed at him now was, where was she now, and was she safe? The abandoned farmhouse loomed before Tommy, its weathered boards groaning in the winter wind. Snow had drifted against the porch steps, untouched except for small animal tracks. Tommy's boots crunched as he made his way to the front door, his breath visible in the fading daylight. The door wasn't locked. It swung open with a gentle push, hinges protesting. Tommy stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The air felt thick with silence and abandonment, but something else too, a lingering presence, as if someone had left in a hurry. In the kitchen, unwashed dishes sat in the sink, a thin layer of frost coating their surfaces. A child's plastic cup decorated with butterflies stood on the counter, half full of frozen juice. Tommy's heart tightened. It was the kind of cup Ellie used to have. Family photos lined the hallway walls. Tommy studied them carefully. Angela Harrison with Lila at a birthday party, both smiling. Lila in a Halloween costume. Mother and daughter at what looked like a school event. They told the story of a normal, happy life, suddenly interrupted. The living room held more signs of hasty departure. Scattered toys, an open coloring book, crayons spilled across the coffee table. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, undecorated except for a single handmade ornament, a paper angel with Lila's name written in childish script. Tommy moved methodically through the house, his military training taking over. In the master bedroom, dresser drawers hung open, clothes strewn about. On the bedside table, a framed photo showed Angela holding legal documents, standing proud in front of the construction company's logo. A crumpled piece of paper caught his eye, half hidden under the bed. Tommy smoothed it out, heart racing as he read the hurried handwriting. "They found me. Take Lila to..." The rest was torn away, leaving only the desperate message fragment. Bright headlights suddenly swept across the bedroom window, cutting through the gathering dusk. Tommy's body reacted before his mind could process. He dropped to the floor, crawling quickly toward the hallway. Car doors slammed outside. Male voices approached the porch, their words becoming clearer. "Boss wants this wrapped up clean," one said. "No loose ends. Place looks empty," the other replied. "Probably split weeks ago." Tommy pressed himself against the wall in the darkened hallway as the front door opened. Two men entered, both wearing dark suits despite the weather, moving with practiced precision. They weren't local law enforcement or private investigators. These men carried themselves differently, dangerous, professional. "Check upstairs," the first man ordered. "I'll take the main floor." Tommy's mind raced. The back door was 15 feet away, through the kitchen. He'd have to time this perfectly. As footsteps climbed the stairs, he crouched low and moved silently toward the kitchen, years of combat training guiding every step. A floorboard creaked under his foot. The man downstairs paused. "You hear that?" Tommy didn't wait. He bolted for the back door, no longer caring about stealth. Behind him, shouts erupted. The door stuck for a heart-stopping moment before bursting open under his shoulder. He sprinted through deep snow toward his truck, keys already in hand. The engine roared to life just as the men emerged from the house. Tommy threw the truck into reverse, tires spinning in the snow before finding purchase. He swung onto the dirt road, headlights off, accelerating into the growing darkness. Once he was sure no one followed, Tommy pulled over and called Rick with shaking hands. "They were there," he said when his friend answered. "2 men in suits. Professional types." "Damn," Rick's voice crackled through the speaker. "I was afraid of this. That company's hired cleaners before. Guys who make problems disappear. They're trying to bury whatever Angela found. They're not just after evidence anymore, are they?" "No," Rick said grimly. "They're tying up loose ends. And right now, that little girl is the biggest loose end they've got." Tommy's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "How long do we have?" "Not long. They'll start connecting dots soon if they haven't already. You need to move fast." The drive home seemed to take forever. Every set of headlights made Tommy's heart race. Every dark vehicle looked like a threat. When he finally pulled into his driveway, the house glowed warm and inviting through the windows. Inside, Ellie and Lila sat at the kitchen table, drawing pictures with Mrs. Colby. They looked up as Tommy entered, their faces bright with welcome, until they saw his expression. "Daddy?" Ellie's voice wavered. Tommy crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering both girls into his arms. They felt so small, so vulnerable against him. Lila trembled slightly, as if she could sense what was coming. "We're leaving town tomorrow," he said softly, still holding them close. His voice was steady despite the fear churning in his gut. He had to be strong for them now. Everything else, the danger, the uncertainty, the growing storm around them, could wait until morning. The pale winter sun had barely cleared the mountains when Tommy began methodically packing their essentials. His military training kicked in as he sorted through what they'd need: warm clothes, non-perishable food, basic medical supplies, and the cash he'd been saving for emergencies. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, though his heart felt heavy. Ellie stood in the doorway of her bedroom, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, what's happening?" Tommy paused, forcing a reassuring smile. "We're taking a little trip, sweetheart, like an adventure." He kept his voice steady, the same way he used to when explaining tough situations to his unit. "What about school?" Ellie asked, watching him fold her warmest sweaters. "Don't worry about that right now. Just pack your special things, but only what fits in your backpack, okay?" In the living room, Lila sat quietly on the couch, her small frame tense with worry. She'd been through this before. The rushed packing, the whispered urgency. Tommy knelt beside her. "You're safe with us, Lila, I promise." The words felt weighted with responsibility. They loaded the old pickup truck before sunrise, the neighborhood still peaceful under its blanket of snow. Tommy helped both girls into the back seat, making sure they were bundled up warm. The truck's engine rumbled to life, echoing in the quiet morning. As they drove through the winding mountain roads, Tommy kept checking the rearview mirror. The girls dozed in the back, Ellie's head resting on Lila's shoulder. The radio played softly, Christmas music still filling the airwaves, until a news bulletin made Tommy's blood run cold. Local authorities are searching for 8-year-old Lila Harrison, believed to have been taken by former Army veteran Thomas Reeves. Tommy switched off the radio, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Someone had twisted the truth, painted him as a kidnapper instead of a protector. The thought made his jaw clench. By late afternoon, they reached a small motel tucked away in the mountains. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly against the gathering dusk. Tommy registered them under the name James Wilson, paying cash. The clerk, an elderly woman with thick glasses, handed him the key with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Their room was basic but clean. 2 beds with faded floral bedspreads, a small TV bolted to the wall, and a bathroom with yellowing tiles. Tommy drew the curtains while the girls explored their temporary shelter. Night fell quickly in the mountains. Tommy ordered pizza delivery, trying to make it feel like an adventure rather than an escape. They ate sitting cross-legged on the beds, and for a moment, things felt almost normal. But when darkness settled in completely, Lila's nightmares began. She thrashed in her sleep, crying out for her mother. "Mama, don't let them take me! Mama, please!" Tommy rushed to her side. gathering her small, trembling form in his arms. "Shh, you're safe, Lila. You're safe here." Ellie watched with worried eyes from the other bed as Tommy settled into the chair beside Lila, keeping his voice low and soothing. "When I was in the Army," he began, "I learned something important about being brave. It's okay to be scared. Being brave means doing what's right even when you're afraid." He stroked Lila's hair gently as she calmed. "I had a friend in my unit, Joey Martinez. One night, our camp got hit by a sandstorm. We couldn't see 3 feet in front of us, but Joey heard a dog crying outside the perimeter. He went out there, wrapped that scared pup in his jacket, and brought it back to safety." Lila's breathing steadied as she listened. "What happened to the dog?" "Joey adopted him, named him Sandy." Tommy smiled at the memory. "Sometimes the scariest moments lead us to exactly where we need to be." Both girls eventually drifted back to sleep, but Tommy remained vigilant. He sat by the window, watching the parking lot through a gap in the curtains. The TV murmured quietly in the background until a familiar face appeared on screen. His own. The news showed his service photo alongside Lila's school picture, painting him as a dangerous kidnapper. His stomach churned as he realized someone had orchestrated this, someone with influence enough to control the narrative. The same people who had forced Lila's mother into hiding were now using the media to hunt them down. At the front desk, the elderly clerk stared at her own TV screen, recognition dawning in her eyes. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the phone. Tommy's instincts, honed by years of combat experience, sparked to life. He heard the distant wail of sirens cutting through the mountain silence. Moving quickly but quietly, he woke the girls. "We need to go now," he whispered, helping them into their coats. "Like a fire drill, remember?" They grabbed their bags with practice speed, another skill learned from their recent days on the run. Tommy ushered them out the back door just as red and blue lights began to flash at the entrance of the motel parking lot. The pickup truck started on the first try, its engine noise muffled by the fresh snow that had begun to fall. Tommy steered them onto the highway, headlights cutting through the swirling white. In the rearview mirror, the motel's lights grew smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely into the darkness. Ellie hugged Lila close in the back seat. Both girls silent but alert. The snow-covered highway stretched endlessly before them, each mile taking them further from home but hopefully closer to answers. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty highway as Tommy's old pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot of the Blue Ridge Diner. His eyes burned from hours of driving, and both girls had fallen asleep in the back seat, Ellie's head resting on Lila's shoulder. The diner's neon "open" sign buzzed quietly in the crisp morning air. Tommy gently shook the girls awake. "Hey there, sleepyheads. Time for breakfast." Lila rubbed her eyes, looking around nervously. "Is it safe?" "We need to eat," Tommy said softly. "And I need coffee. Bad." The bell above the door chimed as they entered. The diner smelled of coffee and fresh-baked biscuits, reminding Tommy how long it had been since their last real meal. A few truckers hunched over their plates at the counter, paying them no mind. "Anywhere you'd like," called a warm voice. The waitress, probably in her 50s, had kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. As she approached their booth, something caught Tommy's eye. A silver cross pendant hanging from her neck. His breath caught. It was identical to the one Sarah had worn every day until... "I'm Grace," the waitress said, setting down menus. "You folks look like you've been on the road a while." Tommy nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just passing through." Grace's eyes lingered on the girls, noting their rumpled clothes and tired faces. Without a word, she returned with 3 glasses of orange juice and set them down. "On the house. You look like you could use some vitamin C." "Thank you," Ellie said quietly, taking a small sip. As Grace took their order, Tommy couldn't help staring at the pendant. Grace noticed and touched it self-consciously. "Is something wrong?" "No, I'm sorry," Tommy apologized. "My wife, she had one just like it before she passed." Grace's expression softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss." She glanced around the nearly empty diner, then slid into the booth across from them. "You know, I've been doing this job long enough to recognize when someone's running from something, and I'm also pretty good at recognizing good people in bad situations." Tommy tensed, ready to grab the girls and bolt, but Grace held up her hands. "I'm not here to judge or cause trouble, but if you need help, sometimes God puts the right people in your path at the right time." Tommy studied her face, years of military training telling him to trust no one. But something in her eyes, the same kindness he'd seen in Sarah, made him pause. "I'm in trouble," he admitted quietly. "But I'm not guilty of what they're saying on the news." Grace nodded. "I believe you. Want to know why?" She gestured to Lila and Ellie, who were sharing a packet of crackers. "Because scared children don't trust bad people, and those girls trust you completely." Tommy's throat tightened. Grace leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I volunteer at New Hope Women's Shelter over in Marion County. We help women and children escape dangerous situations. Sometimes they need to disappear for a while, until things get sorted out." Hope flickered in Tommy's chest. "Do you ever work with women who are whistleblowers, who've exposed dangerous things?" Grace's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at Lila, then back to Tommy. "Let me make a call." She disappeared into the back office. Tommy kept watch through the windows, scanning for any unfamiliar vehicles. When Grace returned several minutes later, her face was bright, with purpose. "My friend Jenny, she's a nurse at the Mountain View Clinic in Riverside. She remembers treating a woman matching your description about 3 weeks ago. Sprained wrist, some bruising. She was scared, wouldn't give her real name." Tommy leaned forward. "Did she say where she was staying?" "Jenny couldn't tell me exactly, but she mentioned the woman asked about cheap extended stay motels. There's only 2 in Riverside, the Pine Valley Inn and the Mountaineer Lodge." Tommy's hands trembled as he pulled out his wallet. Grace waved him off. "Put that away! Breakfast is on me today!" She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a paper bag. "Some sandwiches for the road. And here," she scribbled on her order pad, "directions to Riverside. It's about 2 hours east, but there's a back route that avoids the main highways." "I don't know how to thank you," Tommy said, his voice rough with emotion. Grace touched her cross pendant. "Sometimes angels wear uniforms. Don't give up." Tommy gathered the girls, who were finishing their pancakes. As they headed for the door, Grace pressed a $20 bill into his hand. "For gas," she whispered. "God bless you all." They climbed back into the truck, the paper bag of sandwiches secure between the girls. Tommy studied Grace's handwritten directions, hope flickering for the first time in days. When he looked back at the diner, Grace stood in the window, one hand raised in farewell, her cross pendant catching the morning light. The evening settled over the small mountain town like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a bone-deep chill that made Tommy grateful for the rattling heater in the cabin. The place wasn't much, just a single room with peeling wallpaper and mismatched furniture, but it was tucked away behind Earl's Gas and Grocery, where curious eyes wouldn't find them easily. "It's like camping," Ellie whispered excitedly, bouncing on the worn couch while Lila explored the tiny space with careful steps. The cabin smelled of pine and old wood smoke, with just a hint of mothballs from the stack of quilts in the corner. Tommy checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The nurse from the clinic had agreed to meet them at 7, and the hands were creeping closer to the hour. "Girls, remember what we talked about? When the nurse comes, stay quiet and away from the windows," they chorused together. Lila's small face was serious, but Ellie gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Right on time, 3 soft knocks echoed against the cabin door. Tommy's hand instinctively moved toward his hip before he caught himself. The nurse, Sarah, she'd said her name was, slipped inside quickly. She was younger than Tommy had expected, with kind eyes and practical shoes that didn't make a sound on the wooden floor. "I can't stay long," she said, pulling an envelope from her scrub's pocket. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed it to Tommy. "Angela left this with me 6 weeks ago. Said if anyone came looking for Lila, and if they knew about everything, I should give them this." Tommy opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside was cheap notebook paper, covered in hurried handwriting that slanted across the page. "If you're reading this, protect her. The truth will set us all free." He read it twice more, feeling the weight of each word. "Where is she now?" Sarah glanced at the girls, then lowered her voice. "There's an old Methodist church up in the hills. Been abandoned since the mining company bought up all the land around it. She's been hiding there, gathering evidence. Said she wouldn't leave until she had enough proof to make them pay for what they did." Tommy folded the note carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "How do I find it?" "Take Forest Road past the old mill, then left at the Split Oak. You can't miss the steeple, even in the dark." Sarah moved toward the door, then paused. "She's been alone up there a long time. Be Be careful how you approach." After the nurse left, Tommy built a fire in the small stone fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as he heated up cans of chicken noodle soup. The girls sat cross-legged on a quilt spread before the hearth, sharing a sleeve of crackers. "Is my mom really up there?" Lila asked quietly, stirring her soup without eating. Tommy sat down beside her. "Yes, sweetheart. And tomorrow night, we're going to see her. Will she?" Lila's voice wavered. "Will she still want me?" "Oh, honey." Tommy set his bowl aside and pulled her close. "Your mama loves you more than anything. Everything she's done, all of this, has been to protect you." Ellie scooted closer, wrapping her arms around both of them. "And we love you too," she declared firmly. "Even if everything works out perfect, you're still gonna be my sister? Right, Dad?" Tommy's heart swelled at his daughter's words. He looked at these two girls, one flesh of his flesh, one given to him by circumstance, and marveled at how love could grow so fast and deep in such a short time. Lila had stopped being just a child who needed help somewhere along the way. She had become family. The evening wore on, and the fire burned low. The girls curled up together on the couch, sharing whispered secrets until their eyes grew heavy. Tommy covered them with one of the old quilts, tucking it around their shoulders just as he had done every night since that first Christmas Eve that seemed so long ago now. He stepped outside onto the small porch, needing a moment to clear his head. The moon hung full and bright above the mountains, turning the winter landscape into a study in silver and shadow. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Tommy bowed his head, his breath visible in the cold night air. "Lord," he whispered, "give me the strength to finish this right." The words felt inadequate for everything in his heart. His fear for these precious girls, his hope for tomorrow, his determination to see justice done. But he trusted they were enough. The moonlight caught the edge of Angela's note where it peeked from his pocket. "The truth will set us all free." Tomorrow, they would find out what that truth cost. But for now, in this quiet moment under the vast mountain sky, Tommy let himself feel the full weight of love that had brought them to this place. The morning sun crept over the mountains, painting the frost-covered ground in shades of pink and gold. Tommy stood at the gas pump, his breath visible in the crisp air as he watched the numbers slowly tick upward. The old pickup's tank was nearly empty after their long journey, and he couldn't risk being stranded now. Through the convenience store window, he could see Earl, the elderly station owner, reading his newspaper. The man hadn't asked questions when Tommy paid cash for the cabin, just handed over the key with a quiet nod. Sometimes, silence was the kindest gift a stranger could offer. Tommy's arm muscles ached from tension as he replaced the gas cap. Back in the cabin, Ellie and Lila were curled up like kittens on the sagging couch, exhausted from the previous day's travel. He draped his old army jacket over them when the heating unit started making strange noises in the night. The burner phone in his pocket vibrated. Rick's number. Tommy's stomach tightened as he answered. "They know." Rick's voice was urgent, stripped of its usual calm. "They tapped my phone, Tommy. They're coming. Get out now." Tommy's combat training kicked in instantly. "How long?" "Minutes, maybe. I'm sorry, I..." Headlights swept across the cabin windows, cutting through the early morning darkness. 3 black SUVs appeared from different directions, blocking the access roads. Men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and threatening. Tommy sprinted toward the cabin, his boots crunching on frozen gravel. He burst through the door, startling the girls awake. "Under the bed," he commanded in the same tone he'd used leading soldiers. "Now, don't make a sound." Ellie grabbed Lila's hand, pulling her toward the bedroom. They'd practiced this drill, something Tommy had insisted on, praying they'd never need it. He heard the soft scrape of their bodies sliding across wooden floorboards just as someone pounded on the door. "Federal agents! Open up." Tommy knew better. Real federal agents would have announced themselves differently, would have approached differently. These were the company's men, wearing borrowed authority like ill-fitting suits. He slipped out the back window, just as they broke down the door. The frozen air bit at his face as he crashed through the underbrush, deliberately making noise. Their shouts followed him into the woods, exactly as he'd planned, draw them away from the girls. The forest was his ally now, just like in Afghanistan. Tommy used every trick he'd learned overseas, changing direction after passing trees, using fallen logs to mask his trail, staying low where the underbrush was densest. His boots found purchase on icy rocks as he climbed higher into the tree line. A bullet splintered bark near his head. They were shooting now, abandoning all pretense of legitimacy. Tommy ducked and weaved, his muscles burning with effort. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Hot pain scored his upper arm, but adrenaline kept him moving. He led them on a twisting chase through the pre-dawn darkness, using the terrain to his advantage. The woods grew thicker, the ground steeper. Their frustrated shouts echoed behind him as he disappeared into a ravine, then doubled back using a dry creek bed. From his hidden position, Tommy watched his pursuers charge past, their flashlight beams cutting through the trees. He waited until their voices faded before making his way back toward the cabin, cradling his injured arm. The first rays of sunrise were touching the mountains when he emerged from the woods. His truck sat in the parking lot, windows shattered, tires slashed. They'd made sure he couldn't escape that way. Tommy's heart pounded as he approached the cabin. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Inside, chairs were overturned, drawers emptied onto the floor. The bedroom was chaos, the mattress upended, clothes scattered everywhere. But it was the small object in the middle of the floor that made his blood run cold. Lila's toy horse, the one Ellie had given her, lay broken in pieces. The girls were gone. Tommy stood motionless in the silent cabin, his arm throbbing, his worst fears realized. The empty room seemed to mock him with echoes of children's laughter from just hours before. Tommy's boots squeaked against the polished floor of the sheriff's office as he burst through the double doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. The morning light streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the empty waiting area. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, blood seeping through his hastily wrapped shirt sleeve. "My girls! Where are my girls?" His voice cracked with desperation as he approached the front desk. Sheriff Davis emerged from his office, his weathered face stern. "Mr. Reeves, they're safe. Child Protective Services took them into custody about an hour ago." He gestured to two deputies who moved to flank Tommy. "But you need to come with us." Tommy's shoulders sagged with momentary relief, but tension quickly returned as the sheriff continued speaking. "Thomas Reeves, you're under arrest for child abduction and obstruction of justice." The words fell like heavy stones in the quiet office. "No, you don't understand," Tommy protested as the deputies began to cuff him. "Lila's in danger. Her mother—" "You have the right to remain silent," Sheriff Davis recited, cutting him off. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Tommy's wrists. As they led him toward the holding cells, a young officer named Martinez watched from his desk, his brow furrowed with concern. He had been first on the scene at the cabin and had seen the terror in Lila's eyes, not of Tommy, but of something else. In the interrogation room, Tommy sat under harsh fluorescent lights, his military training evident in his straight posture despite his exhaustion. Detective Brooks slapped a thick file on the metal table. "You took a missing child across state lines, Mr. Reeves. That's a federal offense." Brooks leaned forward. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about keeping her alive," Tommy replied steadily. "The construction company—" "Save the conspiracy theories," Brooks interrupted. "We've got your prints at an abandoned farmhouse, witness statements from the motel, and a destroyed truck that suggests you were running from something. It doesn't look good." Down the hall at Child Services, Lila sat in a bright room filled with toys she didn't touch. Her caseworker, Miss Peterson, offered her a cup of hot chocolate. "Sweetie, you're safe now," Miss Peterson said gently. "Can you tell me what happened?" Lila's small hands wrapped around the warm mug. "Mr. Tommy saved me," she said clearly, looking directly at Miss Peterson. "The bad men were looking for my mommy's papers, and they scared her away. Mr. Tommy gave me food and kept me warm. He read me stories like Daddy used to." Miss Peterson's pen paused over her notepad. "What bad men, Lila?" "The ones in suits. They came to our trailer after Mommy told the truth about the poison in the water." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, don't let them hurt Mr. Tommy too." At the local diner, Grace Miller wiped down tables with shaking hands as the news played on the mounted TV. When she saw Tommy's mugshot flash across the screen, she dropped her rag and rushed to the phone behind the counter. "Hello, Mountain Herald. This is Grace Miller from May's Diner. I need to speak to someone about Tommy Reeves and Angela Harrison." She twisted the phone cord around her finger. "Yes, the whistleblower case. I think they're connected, and I have proof." The story spread through the small town like wildfire. Some condemned Tommy as a kidnapper. but others remembered his quiet kindness, his service to the country, how he'd raised Ellie alone after Sarah died. Questions began to surface about the construction company's influence in local politics. Officer Martinez couldn't shake his unease. During his lunch break, he pulled the Harrison whistleblower file and found disturbing patterns, witnesses who changed their stories, evidence that disappeared, investigators who were suddenly transferred. In his cell, Tommy sat on the thin mattress, his head in his hands. The events of the past week played through his mind like a fever dream. Lila behind the dumpster, the farmhouse, Grace's kindness, the shots in the dark. He touched his wedding ring, remembering Sarah's words about choosing kindness, even when it hurt. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Tommy looked up to see a woman in a pressed blazer, notebook in hand. Her press badge identified her as Catherine Walsh from the Mountain Herald. "Mr. Reeves?" She stood outside his cell, studying him with keen eyes. "I covered Angela Harrison's story last year before she disappeared. A waitress named Grace Miller called our tip line with some interesting information." She pulled up a chair. "Would you like to tell your side of the story?" Tommy straightened, his face showing the weight of everything he'd seen. He thought of Lila's trust, Ellie's courage, and Angela's fight for truth. Slowly, he nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think it's time everyone knew what really happened." Catherine Walsh clicked her pen and opened her notebook, ready to capture the story that would shake their small town to its foundations. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as people packed the wooden benches, their winter coats brushing against each other in the cramped space. The local paper, the Mountain Herald, rustled in dozens of hands, its bold headline declaring, "Veteran father risks all to save whistleblower's daughter." Tommy sat at the defendant's table, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to his usual work clothes. His public defender, Sarah Chen, spread documents across the table while whispers rippled through the growing crowd. Behind him, faces both familiar and strange filled every available seat. Diner regulars, church members, and veterans wearing their service caps. Grace Miller stood near the courthouse steps, handing out blue ribbons to show support. "Tommy Reeves is what this town used to be about," she told anyone who would listen. Helping others, no questions asked. Judge Martha Wilson entered, her robes sweeping behind her. The bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise." The crowd's movement created a sound like autumn leaves in the wind. "Your Honor," Sarah Chen began, "we'd like to call Richard Dalton to the stand." Rick walked forward, his limp more pronounced than usual. After being sworn in, he settled into the witness chair, pulling out a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Dalton," Sarah said, "please tell the court about your investigation into Cornerstone Construction and its connection to Angela Harrison's disappearance." Rick's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. "I found evidence of systematic bribing of local officials to cover up toxic waste dumping. When Angela Harrison threatened to expose them, they didn't just try to silence her, they made her disappear." He opened the envelope, producing documents and photographs. These show money transfers to shell companies, falsified environmental reports, and surveillance photos of Miss Harrison taken by private investigators hired by Cornerstone. The district attorney objected, but Judge Wilson overruled him. The evidence kept coming, each piece adding weight to Tommy's story. Grace took the stand next, smoothing her waitress uniform as she Saturday. "I knew something was wrong when I saw them in my diner," she testified. "But not wrong like the news was saying. Wrong like someone running from real danger. That little girl looked at Tommy like he was her guardian angel." The courtroom door opened, and a murmur rolled through the crowd. A thin woman with shoulder-length dark hair entered, supported by a nurse in white scrubs. Angela Harrison's face was pale but determined as she made her way to the front. "Your Honor," the DA started, rising from his chair. "I need to speak," Angela interrupted, her voice weak but clear. "That man," she pointed at Tommy, "protected my daughter when I couldn't. When Cornerstone's men found me at the farmhouse, I had to run again. I left Lila behind to keep her safe, hoping she'd find help. Tears streaked down her face. She found better help than I could have prayed for." Judge Wilson leaned forward. "Miss Harrison, are you prepared to testify about Cornerstone Construction's activities?" "Yes, Your Honor. I have copies of every document, every email, every photo. I was their senior accountant for 6 years. I know where all the bodies are buried. Literally, in some cases, with their chemical dumps." The prosecutor stood, his face ashen. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, The state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Reeves. Judge Wilson nodded, her gavel striking with fierce finality. Case dismissed. Mr. Reeves, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Tommy's handcuffs were removed as people surged forward, but his eyes were fixed on the doorway, where Mrs. Colby had just appeared with two small figures. Daddy! Ellie's voice cut through the chaos. She and Lila broke free from Mrs. Colby's gentle grip, racing down the center aisle. Tommy dropped to his knees, gathering both girls into his arms as sunlight streamed through the high windows, warming their embrace. Lila's tears soaked his shirt as she whispered, "You came back for me. Always," Tommy murmured, holding them tighter. "I will always come back for you both." The crowd formed a respectful circle around them, many wiping away tears. Angela Harrison moved closer, touching her daughter's hair with trembling fingers. Lila turned, her eyes wide with recognition and joy. "Mommy?" Mother and daughter fell into each other's arms, while Tommy held Ellie, their tears of joy mingling in the morning light. The courtroom, usually a place of judgment and punishment, had become holy ground, sacred space where broken pieces of lives were being mended back together. Rick pushed through the crowd with Grace beside him, both beaming. "Let's get you all home," Rick said, his gruff voice gentle. Tommy stood, keeping one arm around Ellie while reaching out to squeeze Rick's shoulder. "Thank you," he said, looking at both Rick and Grace. "All of you." Grace smiled, dabbing at her eyes with her apron. "The diner's got fresh pie waiting. On the house this time. No arguments." They moved toward the courthouse steps, the crowd parting to let them through. Outside, winter sunshine sparkled off fresh snow, and the morning air rang with church bells welcoming them back into the light of day. The safe house was a small cabin tucked away in the wooded hills outside town. Warm light spilled from its windows onto the fresh snow, and smoke curled from the chimney into the star-filled sky. Inside, Tommy sat in a worn armchair, his daughter Ellie perched on one arm while Lila nestled close to her mother Angela on the faded couch across from them. The fire crackled softly as Angela held Lila's hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she spoke. "I never wanted to leave you, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing Lila's hair back from her face. "But they were watching our house, following us to school. I knew the only way to protect you was to make them think I was gone." Lila pressed closer to her mother's side. "I was so scared, Mommy." "I know, baby. I was too." Angela looked up at Tommy, her eyes shining with tears. "But God sent us an angel in an old army jacket." Tommy shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Ellie squeezed his shoulder with pride. The cabin Rick had arranged was simple but secure. Thick curtains drawn across the windows, multiple exits, and a police car parked discreetly down the road. It felt like the first safe breath they'd all taken in weeks. "The construction company thought they could silence me," Angela continued, reaching into her bag to pull out a thick manila envelope. "But I spent months gathering more evidence. Bank records, emails, photographs of the contaminated sites, even recorded conversations with executives planning the cover-up. That's why they were so desperate to find you," Tommy said quietly, remembering the men with guns at the cabin. Angela nodded. "I was moving between shelters, churches, anywhere I could hide. But I kept collecting proof." She turned to Lila with tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry you ended up alone, baby. I thought my sister would keep you safe, but when they threatened her family—" "It's okay, Mommy," Lila said, wiping her mother's cheeks. "Mr. Tommy found me. He made me feel safe again." Tommy's throat tightened as he remembered that first night, the tiny figure shivering behind the dumpster, asking him not to tell anyone she was hungry. Any decent person would have helped, he managed. "No," Angela said firmly. "Most decent people would have called the authorities. You listened to your heart instead of just the law. You protected my daughter when the whole system failed her." She reached across and gripped his hand. "Thank you for being brave enough to do what was right, not what was easy." Ellie slipped off the arm of the chair and went to sit by Lila, throwing her arms around the smaller girl. "We're sisters now," she declared. "Even when you go home with your mom. That won't change." Lila's face lit up. "Really?" "Really," Ellie said solemnly. "We can have sleepovers and everything. Right, Dad?" Tommy smiled at his daughter's certainty. "Of course, sweetheart. As long as it's okay with Miss Harrison." "Please call me Angela," she said softly. "And yes, absolutely yes. Our girls deserve all the joy they can get after everything they've been through." A knock at the door made them all jump, but it was just Rick bringing coffee and sandwiches. He set them on the small kitchen table and flipped on the TV, keeping the volume low. On the screen, they could see the local news showing live footage of the construction company's headquarters. Police cars lined the street, their lights painting the night in red and blue. Men in suits were being let out in handcuffs, while reporters thrust microphones toward them. "The FBI just moved in," Rick reported, satisfaction clear in his voice. "Your evidence was the final piece they needed, Angela. The whole corrupt network is coming down. The executives, the officials they bribed, everyone." They watched in silence as more arrests were made. Then the camera panned to show something unexpected. Dozens of townspeople gathering in the square, holding candles despite the cold. Pastor Jen stood among them, leading a prayer circle. The bells of the old church began to ring, clear and bright in the winter air. The sound carried even to their hidden cabin, marking what felt like a holy moment. "Listen," Ellie whispered, going to the window. "The bells sound like they're celebrating." "They are," Tommy said, standing to join her. "They're ringing for truth and justice and good people being brave. And family," Lila added, taking both Ellie's and her mother's hands. "They're ringing for family too." Angela smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart. For all kinds of family, the ones we're born with and the ones God sends to save us when we need them most." Outside, beyond the warmth of their safe haven, the bells continued to ring across the snow-covered town. They rang for endings and beginnings, for truth revealed and wrongs made right, for two little girls who found sisterhood in the midst of chaos, and for the unbreakable bonds forged in the darkest hours of their longest night. The corrupt men who had caused so much pain were being led away to face justice, while in the town square, neighbors joined hands and lifted their voices in prayer. The candlelight pushed back the darkness as the bells sang out hope into the cold December air. The late January sun cast long shadows across Tommy's front yard as he stood on his newly repaired porch. The wood beneath his feet still smelled fresh, a testament to the army of volunteers who had shown up with hammers and hope in their hands just weeks ago. He remembered how Pastor Jen had organized the effort, turning what could have been a day's work into a celebration of community. Inside, the house hummed with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. The walls, once bearing witness to lonely nights, now echoed with daily laughter. On the kitchen counter sat 3 different casseroles, dropped off by neighbors who'd previously kept their distance. Mrs. Colby's famous mac and cheese, still warm from her oven, sat beside Betty Wilson's chicken pot pie and Jane Thompson's lasagna. Tommy smiled, remembering how just yesterday he'd helped 2 teenage boys at the Veterans Center where he now volunteered as a counselor. Their stories weren't so different from his own. Looking for redemption, searching for purpose. Pastor Jen had approached him about the position after everything settled down, saying his experience could help others heal. She'd been right. The sound of giggles floated through the open window as Ellie and Lila burst through the front door, their backpacks bouncing against their winter coats. They'd been inseparable since starting school together, sharing classes and secrets in equal measure. "Dad!" Ellie called out, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Mrs. Martinez said I got an A+ on my science project." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Tommy said, pulling her into a quick hug. "And how was your day, Lila?" Lila beamed, her eyes bright with the confidence that had slowly replaced her former fear. "I got picked first for basketball in gym class." She looked past Tommy to where Angela was coming up the walkway, carrying a grocery bag. "Mom, I made the team." Angela's face lit up as she climbed the porch steps. Her own healing journey had been steady, if sometimes difficult. The whistleblower case had concluded with full vindication, but the emotional scars took longer to fade. Still, having her daughter safe and their new extended family close by had worked miracles. "That's amazing, honey," Angela said, setting down her bag to embrace Lila. "I told you all that practicing would pay off." The kitchen soon filled with the comfortable chaos of dinner preparation. Tommy and Angela moved around each other with the ease of people who'd shared many meals together, while the girls set the table and chatted about their day. The casseroles were reheated, fresh salad was tossed, and soon the warm aroma of home-cooked food filled every corner of the house. As they settled around the table, Tommy noticed Lila fidgeting with something under her napkin. Her eyes kept darting to him throughout the meal, a secret smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Finally, As they finished their last bites, she couldn't contain herself any longer. "Tommy," she said, her voice soft but sure, "I made something for you today, in art class." She pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper from beneath her napkin. The room grew quiet as Lila handed it to him. Tommy unfolded it slowly, aware of everyone watching. His breath caught in his throat as the drawing came into view. Done in bright colors, it showed a tall figure in what was clearly meant to be his old army uniform, standing protective and strong. Beside him were three smaller figures, Ellie, Lila, and Angela, all holding hands and smiling. Above them, written in careful letters decorated with stars, were the words, "My hero dad." Tommy's vision blurred as he stared at the picture. Ellie leaned against his shoulder, while Angela reached across the table to squeeze his hand. The simple title, "My Hero Dad," spoke volumes about how far they'd all come. "Do you like it?" Lila asked, her voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. Tommy had to clear his throat before he could speak. "Like it? Lila, this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." He stood up, walking to the living room where Sarah's photograph hung in its familiar spot on the wall. The frame next to it had been empty for years. He'd never known quite what belonged there. Now he knew. With careful movements, he positioned Lila's drawing in the frame, stepping back to see how perfectly it fit beside his late wife's smiling face. The others had followed him into the living room. Tommy felt Ellie's hand slip into his on one side, while Lila pressed against him on the other. Angela stood close by, her presence completing their unlikely but unshakable family circle. Looking at Sarah's photograph, Tommy spoke softly to his wife's memory. "You'd be proud of us, Sarah." The words carried all the love, grief, healing, and hope that had brought them to this moment. The evening light painted the room in soft gold, touching Sarah's photograph and Lila's drawing with the same gentle glow. Outside, neighbors walked their dogs or chatted on porches, the same community that had once cast suspicious glances, now offering warm waves through the window. The sound of children playing basketball drifted from the court down the street, and somewhere nearby, church bells chimed the evening hour. Tommy stood there, surrounded by his expanded family, feeling the weight of Sarah's wedding ring on the chain around his neck. It no longer felt like a burden of grief, but a reminder of love's ability to grow and transform. The house that had once felt too empty now burst with life, proving that family could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply open your heart to love again. The moment stretched peacefully, filled with the kind of quiet joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be, with exactly the people you're meant to be with. Through the window, the last rays of sunlight painted the snow in shades of pink and gold, a reminder that even the coldest winters eventually give way to spring. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, coating the small Appalachian town in a pristine blanket of white. The old church bells rang out across Main Street, their familiar chimes drawing people through the gathering dusk toward the warm glow of stained glass windows. Tommy Reeves stood at the bottom of the church steps, his breath visible in the cold air, watching as families hurried past with cheerful greetings. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Reeves," called out the gas station owner, tipping his hat. "God bless you, Tommy," added Mrs. Wilson, the librarian, squeezing his arm as she passed. A year ago, those same people had watched him with suspicion and whispered behind his back. Now their smiles were genuine, their warmth real, amazing what truth and time could do to heal old wounds. "Dad, come on, we're going to be late." Ellie tugged at his sleeve, her red wool hat dusted with snowflakes. Beside her, Lila Harrison bounced on her toes, no longer the frightened child who'd hidden behind dumpsters. Her cheeks were rosy with excitement, her new Christmas dress peeking out beneath her winter coat. Angela Harrison appeared at his side, looking healthy and strong, so different from the haunted whistleblower who'd been forced into hiding. "The girls are right," she said, smiling. "We don't want to miss Pastor Jen's special service." Inside, the church glowed with hundreds of candles. Evergreen garlands wrapped the wooden pillars, and red poinsettias lined the altar. The pews were packed, but people shifted to make room for them in the front row. Tommy noticed Rick Dalton, his ex-cop friend, sitting with Grace from the diner. Even the young officer who'd believed in him during his arrest was there with his family. Pastor Jen stepped up to the pulpit, her eyes twinkling as she surveyed the congregation. "Brothers and sisters, she began, her voice carrying to every corner. Exactly 1 year ago, on the coldest Christmas Eve I can remember, God sent us a reminder of His endless grace. The room fell silent as she recounted the story. How a weary veteran found a hungry child. How that simple act of kindness had exposed corruption and healed not just one family, but an entire community. Tommy felt Ellie's small hand slip into his as Pastor Jen described their midnight escape, the chase, the arrest that followed. But this isn't a story about scandal, Pastor Jen continued. This is a story about courage, about choosing love over fear, about how one man's decision to help a stranger revealed the very best in all of us. Tommy glanced around the church, remembering faces. There was Mrs. Colby, who'd watched the girls without question, the nurse who'd helped find Angela, the reporter who'd believed him when no one else would. Each person had played a part in their miracle. After the sermon, the congregation moved outside for the annual tree lighting. The massive evergreen stood dark against the purple twilight sky, waiting. Tommy remembered how different everything had felt last Christmas. The fear, the uncertainty, the desperate prayer for guidance. "Lila," Pastor Jen called out. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Lila stepped forward, no trace of her former shyness as she took her place before the crowd. The piano music began, and her clear voice rose into the snowy night. Silent night. Holy night. All is calm, all is bright. Tommy's vision blurred with tears. He could still see her as she'd been that first night, trembling, hungry, whispering her plea not to tell anyone. Now her voice soared above the square, strong and pure as truth itself. Ellie beamed with pride at her friend, and Angela wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by how far they'd come. The song ended to enthusiastic applause. Pastor Jen handed Tommy and Angela the switch for the Christmas tree lights. "Together," she said softly. They pressed it as one, and suddenly the massive tree blazed to life, thousands of white lights reflecting off the falling snow. The crowd gasped in delight. Children pointed and laughed. Somewhere, a baby cooed. Tommy felt something profound settle in his chest as he watched the lights twinkle across the upturned faces of his neighbors. The fear that had gripped him that first night, the worry about doing the right thing, about protecting his daughter, about breaking the law, seemed far away now. In its place was a deep gratitude for the mysterious ways God worked in people's lives. Standing there in the gently falling snow, surrounded by the family he'd somehow gained and the community that had learned to believe in miracles, Tommy closed his eyes. His prayer was simple, but heartfelt. "Thank you for bringing her to my door." Lila's arms wrapped around his waist, and he opened his eyes to find her smiling up at him. She wasn't just the little girl he'd saved anymore. She had saved something in him too, something he'd thought died with Sarah. She had reminded him that love was worth any risk, that doing right mattered more than playing it safe. The Christmas lights sparkled in the darkness, and all around them, the town that had witnessed their miracle celebrated the power of one simple act of kindness on a cold winter's night. Spring sunshine warmed Tommy's weathered face as he sat on his front porch, the wooden boards creaking gently beneath his rocking chair. His coffee steamed in the morning air while birds chirped in the maple trees that lined his modest yard. The newspaper lay spread across his lap, its bold headline catching the light. "Local hero receives medal for bravery and service to community." His calloused fingers traced the words, still not quite believing it. Below the headline was a photo of him accepting the award at Town Hall, Ellie and Lila beaming beside him. The article mentioned how he'd helped establish a new program for at-risk youth and families in crisis, working alongside Pastor Jen and the church. The screen door squeaked, and he looked up to see Angela Harrison coming through with a picnic basket, her dark hair caught in the breeze. Behind her, Ellie and Lila giggled as they carried plates and cups, their sneakers thumping against the wooden steps. "We thought you might want some company," Angela said, setting the basket down on the small table beside him. Her eyes were bright, so different from the haunted look they'd held a year ago. "The girls insisted on making the sandwiches themselves." "We put extra pickles on yours," Lila announced proudly, her ponytail bobbing as she helped spread out the checkered blanket on the porch floor. At 10 years old now, she'd grown taller, stronger, the fear that once shadowed her face replaced by confidence and joy. Ellie, now 11, arranged paper plates in a neat circle. "Dad, did you see your picture in the paper? Mrs. Colby says she's going to frame it for the diner." Tommy chuckled, folding the newspaper carefully. Don't know about all this fuss. Just did what needed doing, that's all. That's exactly why you deserve it, Angela said softly, sitting down beside him. She pulled out containers of potato salad and fresh strawberries. Because you never thought twice about helping us when everyone else looked away. The girls settled cross-legged on the blanket, diving into their lunch with the endless appetite of growing children. Tommy watched them share potato chips and whisper secrets, marveling at how natural it felt. This makeshift family born from one desperate Christmas Eve. Remember when you first brought me here? Lila asked between bites, her eyes distant with memory. I was so scared, but Ellie gave me her teddy bear to sleep with. Mr. Snuggles. Ellie nodded solemnly. He's very good at keeping nightmares away. Tommy's throat tightened. That bear's seen a lot of tears over the years. Your mama gave him to you when you were just tiny, Ellie. Angela reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. They all knew he meant Sarah, his late wife, whose photo still smiled down from the living room wall. These days, the sight of it brought more comfort than pain. The afternoon stretched lazy and golden around them. They shared stories between bites of food, some funny, some bittersweet. Tommy told them about the young boy who joined his veterans mentoring program. How the kid's eyes lit up when Tommy taught him to fix an old truck engine. You gave him hope, Angela said. Just like you gave us hope when we needed it most. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks, the girls begged for a bedtime story. It had become their tradition, even though they were older now. Please, Dad? Ellie pleaded, using the puppy dog eyes that still worked every time. Yeah, please, Lila echoed, scooting closer to lean against his knee. Tommy settled deeper into his chair, his voice taking on the gentle cadence of a storyteller. Did I ever tell you about different kinds of courage? There's the kind they give medals for, running into danger, facing down threats. But there's another kind that's just as important. The girls leaned in, even though they'd heard versions of this story before. Angela smiled, gathering the lunch dishes quietly. It's the courage to open your heart when it's been hurt before, Tommy continued. The courage to trust again, to let love in, even when you're scared. That's the kind of courage your mama showed, Lila, when she stood up for what was right. The kind Ellie showed when she welcomed a stranger into our home without hesitation. He paused, looking out at the deepening twilight. And sometimes, the greatest courage comes in just a whisper. Like when a little girl trusted enough to ask for help, even though the whole world had let her down. Lila's eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. Ellie wrapped an arm around her friend's shoulders. No, her sister, in all the ways that truly mattered. Time for homework, girls, Angela called gently from the doorway. We've got that science project to finish. They scrambled up, hugging Tommy tight before racing inside, their laughter trailing behind them like music. Tommy stayed on the porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. A deep peace settled over him, as gentle as the evening breeze. This was what redemption felt like, he realized. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the quiet miracle of broken pieces coming together to form something beautiful and new. That frightened whisper behind a dumpster had led him here, had shown the whole town what love could do when given room to grow. Tommy closed his eyes and smiled, listening to the girls' voices drifting through the screen door, to the rustle of spring leaves, to the steady beating of his healed heart. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Tommy Reeves, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.